Newsmaker Sunday with Fox 10's John Hook.
Thanks for joining us on Newsmaker Sunday. This is how we first saw the images 4 years ago this week. The horrible crash in the Superstition Mountains that claimed the lives of 6 people on board, including Karen Perry's 3 children, Morgan, Logan, and Luke, and her estranged husband, Sean Perry, the father of those children. 2 others killed on board, Russell Hardy, Joseph Hardwick. And as we see those images and we see the charred area of the Superstitions, the glorious Superstitions where these 6 souls perished, I think the whole community felt this so profoundly on the eve of Thanksgiving in 2011. 4 years later, Karen Perry is still coming to terms with this, and you can say a lot of things about the loss and the horrific heartache that she's been through, but she is a survivor. Karen Perry is our guest this week on Newsmaker Sunday. Great to see you. You and I struck up kind of a friendship throughout this, and you've been through a lot. Karen has chronicled this now in a book called Angels 3, the Karen Perry story, and it is a fascinating read. I had no idea how much you had been through before all of this happened. 2 battles with cancer, infertility issues, a pretty hard-scrabble childhood where you lost your sister at a young age. Been through a lot. Do you ever wonder, Karen, why me?
Of course I've wondered why me, but I've had time now to reflect and to process and to turn that question into hopefully something beautiful that's come from tragedy.
As you were going through this, were you aware, how quickly were you aware that the whole community profoundly felt your loss?
Right away.
Even in your grief, you could feel or tell that the whole valley, the state, the country, the world, upon reading about this and seeing it, they just felt deeply moved by it.
There's very little I remember about that year, in fact, but I do remember that right after the accident, the day after the accident, there were so many phone calls and so much outreach from everywhere, mail and calls, and just people everywhere were reaching out to me, and it touched me very deeply.
What you may not know about Karen is her love of aviation, ironically, started at a very, very young age, and you became a pilot. You're a flight attendant with Delta to this day. You never worry about it, do you? And
No,
you never worried about these kids, you never worried about your kids flying as well?
No, I never did. I never had any qualms whatsoever about them getting on an airplane. If anything, I was more afraid of them having a car accident or something like that.
But one of your sons said something in the weeks leading up to that flight, didn't he?
Yeah, he did. My 8-year-old son, Logan, a week before the accident, we were at a stoplight, and he reached over to hold my hand, and he looked right at me in the eyes, and he said, "Mother, if I die next week, does that mean you'll still be my mother?" And I was stunned, and I said, "Of course, Logan, I'll always be your mother."
And then he related to you that he was really afraid to fly, and you didn't know that, right?
No, I didn't know that.
There are so many ironies in all of this, and crazy foreshadowing and things that happened in this entire story. 4 years later, when you look back at that period, is it kind of a blank where you just emotionally almost checked out during that period? Can you not remember a lot of it? You said that a lot of that year is a loss, particularly after, I think it was the 23rd of November.
Yes, it was, and a lot of that year, there's certain things that I do remember pretty clearly, but in general, that year is pretty much gone in my memory. And I think that's, you know, the way we protect ourselves from pain, but I don't remember much of it.
You just yesterday hiked up there.
I did.
And you've done this now, how many times have you been up the mountain?
That was the 8th time hiking, and I've spent the night up there twice.
Tell me why that's so important to you.
That's a sacred place for me because that's where my children perished. And so to me, that's like their gravesite. So I go up there and I honor them and remember them, and it's a place for me to go and reflect. It's a very beautiful place and a very peaceful place, a very hard place to get to.
Right, it's a tough climb. You're sore today, right?
I'm very sore.
Trooper.
I'm very sore, and I think every time I go up there, I can almost hear my kids laughing and saying, "Look what we made Mother do again."
Right.
You know.
And interestingly enough, you live with a glorious view of the superstitions.
Yes.
Right out your window.
Yes, it's been part of my life for a long time.
When you go up there now, I remember when we chatted maybe a year after the crash, you had a bag of stuff. There were several just pieces that you found that were not recovered
Right.
in the crash. Do you still find things up there now from the crash? You do?
I do. Every time I go up there, I find something. And I've found some very interesting things that I've been selective about bringing down. Gosh.
And people leave you messages up there, right? And messages for your children.
Yes. Yes. People have been so kind. There's a group, and I didn't know it until yesterday, but there's a hiking group in Arizona that left the crosses. There's a memorial of crosses. Mm-hmm. All this time, I didn't know who left that up there, and I recently just Googled a hiking group because I wanted to find people who would be interested in going up there, and I just stumbled on this group called Meet Up, and as it turns out, they went up with us yesterday, and
no kidding.
One of the people in their group is the one who put that up.
And you have a permanent memorial up there now, too, which I saw as it was being, it had been engraved, but you hadn't put it up there yet. That went up 2 years ago?
Yes.
2 years ago.
Yeah.
Tell me about the book and the journey of writing the book. First of all, why did you want to write it?
You know, I wanted to write it for a couple of reasons. One, as any parent who's lost a child will understand, I want my children to be remembered. And so it was a document for myself and for them that they would be remembered. But secondly, when I reflected on the whole story, I thought, you know, this is not a focus on tragedy. This is a story of hope and inspiration for people who have suffered a loss, which is pretty much all of us.
I think the universal feeling in this community was, how can she hold it together? Because all of us who were parents don't know how you did it. How would you answer that question? Because your composure and grace in this unspeakable tragedy was remarkable.
I think what kept me going, number one, was the memory of my children. And secondly, my faith kept me moving forward. It got me out of bed every day. And I started a nonprofit that, you know, was meant to help underprivileged children. And we provide hot meals and structured activities and equine-assisted therapy for underprivileged children. And some of these children were children that my children went to school with.
Right.
And so that was beauty that came out of tragedy. A couple of years of seeing these beautiful little people doing better and better every day, and seeing the smiles on their faces, and realizing that I still have a purpose, even though I had a huge hole in my heart and in my life.
And no better way than to honor your children's memory by helping other kids.
Of course.
When I look at the pictures of these kids, they're just absolutely beautiful, but they had their challenges, particularly your youngest and your oldest. Let's start with Morgan. She had some real profound medical issues, didn't she? Yes,
she did. Morgan presented with epileptic seizures 6 weeks after she was born. And it was never conclusive as to why. The only answers we got was that it was non-genetic. And she had a lot of struggles in her young life. She went through 5 brain surgeries, and everything that Morgan learned how to do was incredibly difficult to teach her. And she just had profound difficulties with meeting her milestones, and part of that was the medication that she took to subdue the seizures. They also unfortunately interfered with her ability to learn.
Right, and then your middle child, Logan, everything good. He became kind of your guardian in some respects, didn't he?
Yes,
and he took that role. He knew what the role was, because your youngest, Luke, he had kind of he had some learning disabilities as well, right?
He was diagnosed with autism.
Autism, yes. I was going to say Asperger's, but autism. But a character of a kid, just a quirky, fun kid.
Very much so.
The life of the party.
Oh, yeah.
And wickedly smart.
Yes, very smart. Taught himself how to read and write when he was 2.
I know, I read that. That just was amazing.
An incredibly smart kid who loved photography, would take hundreds of pictures of himself, and left me so many gifts of photos.
I remember you telling me that on your computer, he would hijack your computer and take pictures of himself, snapping away shots, many of which you discovered after the crash.
Yes.
That you were so thankful that he had done this, but at the time, it was a bit of a problem, and he would dial your friends up and people on your phone too. He was precocious, right?
Absolutely, yeah.
That's a 6-year-old.
Oh yeah, a lot of fun. And yeah, Logan used to do it too. He would dial people up and get me in trouble for some of his phone calls, and I would get messages back from the parents saying, why don't you lock him out of the phone? And I would say I already did that, but he figured out that if he dialed 911, that he could get an outside line, and then the next thing I knew, the sheriff was showing up at my door at 2 in the morning, so that wasn't good either.
When you look back 4 years, is it harder in some respects than it was even immediately afterwards? Does some of this soak in actually as time goes on, or do you feel as if you're further down the road than you were 4 years ago?
That's an interesting question, because I feel maybe a little of both. To me, the whole experience is still surreal to a certain extent, even though I know that it happened. I mean, even today, and when I was going through this story with Landon...
You're the author.
The author. We would, get together once a week at Starbucks, and we would just go through, experience by experience. And he could bring up something about one of my children not being here anymore, and it was almost like I had just heard it for the first time. Right. And I would go, what? They're not here anymore? I mean, I just have to keep hitting myself and saying it's so hard for me to really accept and believe that they're not here.
Yet you're so close to them in so many ways. They're always with you right out your window. You climb that mountain. You feel their presence in many different ways, don't you?
Yes, I do.
Still,
and I get a lot of signs from them.
When you're traveling, you're a flight attendant with Delta. Do people coming out of Phoenix, do they recognize you?
Sometimes they do, yeah.
And they don't know what to say. I'm sure a lot of them do not know what to say. We all felt that.
Yeah. Sometimes they just hug me and say, I know who you are, and I think the world of you, or, it is touching that people recognize and remember.
As we go to break, what did you learn about this community through all this?
Oh my gosh, what a wonderful community of people here. Absolutely, John. Really, really wonderful people. It touched me very deeply.
I know it did. We're with Karen Perry, who 4 years ago this week lost her 3 children, Morgan, Logan, Luke, and her estranged husband, Sean Perry, in the crash that killed 6 people in the Superstition Mountains. When we come back, a little bit more about the crash, the causes of the crash, what led to it, and the incredible chain of circumstances of which maybe if one had been missing, everyone would have made it down south to Safford that night. Back on Newsmaker Sunday with Karen Perry, author of the new book, Angels 3, The Karen Perry Story. Back in a moment. Karen Perry is my guest on Newsmaker Sunday. She lost her 3 children, 3 young children, and her estranged husband on the flight that crashed into the Superstitions 4 years ago right now, around Thanksgiving. It was Thanksgiving Eve. That night, when we saw those images from the mountain, we didn't know what had happened. I was on the air, Carrie and I were on the air, and the pictures started coming in. You were first made aware through a phone call, right? But you had a little bit of an inkling, a little stirring when you tried or were waiting for a text or a message from your kids saying, we made it, we're in Safford. The flight was to go from Falcon Field to Safford. They were going to spend Thanksgiving with your husband.
Exactly. I had sent a text, and my text said, did you make it in okay? And I sent that to their father, and did not get a response, but didn't think much of it because it's happened before where, you know, people get busy and they don't answer you right away. And I thought, well, they're probably there and I'll hear from them in a little while. I drifted back off to sleep, and it was after that I was awoken by a phone call.
Where someone said, I think the words were, a plane has crashed. Mm-hmm. And you thought, well, planes crash all the time. Why are you telling me this? You did not put it together. No.
Not at all.
When did you finally wrap your mind around it?
When I was given some specifics that it was Ponderosa Aviation.
Who your husband flew with.
Yeah.
He was a pilot with them.
Exactly. And I was told it was one of their aircraft. So I called the owner, and I basically said, I understand one of your airplanes is down. And he was in shock as well, and he said, you mean the sheriff hasn't been there yet? And that's when I knew that it was really bad.
And Paul Babu came to your door eventually.
Yep.
Paul's been a guest on this program. I know him pretty well. He, I think the term soft hands would apply here. He handled it as best as could be expected to tell you that news.
Paul is a wonderful human being and very compassionate, very honest man, and I think the world of him.
We started to get to know each other as I worked on a story on the airspace issue in that area. I would show the story, but it's 9 minutes long, so you can look it up online. I'll try to post it somewhere, but basically what we discovered through internal FAA memos is there was concern about the airspace in that area. In other words, you've got the superstitions that rise to a certain level. Pilots are expected to stay below the tops of the mountain because they don't want to get into airspace where jetliners are coming in. So the pilots are kept somewhat artificially low and puts the mountains into play. Mm-hmm. But that was only one of several factors in this crash, and really pilot error was to blame, the official cause from the NTSB. Are you comfortable with what they concluded?
I'm comfortable with it, and I believe there are other factors that came into play.
The airspace being one of them.
The airspace being one of them. In any aircraft accident, there's always a chain of events and links, if you will, and perhaps if any of those links had been broken, maybe the accident could have been avoided. But yes, the pilot became disoriented and lost situational awareness, and basically the accident was called controlled flight into terrain. However, there were some things that happened that night that it was just...
Your husband, Sean, did not fly the plane that night, and you assumed he probably would be flying, but he was probably in the back tending to the kids.
He was in the back, yeah.
Right.
He was in the back, and also there was a shift change at Falcon Field Tower at 6:30, and the aircraft had just taken off a few minutes before that, and at 6:30 the controllers were doing a briefing for the next shift, and at 6:31 the aircraft hit the mountain. And even though they were just exiting the controlled airspace for Falcon Field, had someone been monitoring the screen at that time, they would have seen an aircraft, you know, heading 200 miles an hour towards the mountain.
Exactly. And aside from that, it was a moonless night. Had the moon been even remotely up in some degree, the pilot would have seen terrain.
Right.
So there were so many factors that led to this.
Yeah.
4 years later, Karen, do you ever ask yourself why that night, why that chain of events, why you?
I've wondered that, of course, I've wondered that. And I have to be at peace with it and come to terms with it, because it did happen. And I have just, instead of trying to make sense of it, I have just tried to be at peace with it and try to go forward with my life. I don't say moving on, I say moving forward, because it's more of a transcendence. I take the experiences with my children and my family with me as I move forward.
With that in mind, do you have people seeking you out who are going through crisis to say, how do I do this?
Yeah.
Is that tough to handle, to take on that?
Sometimes it is.
And you've got your own stuff to deal with.
Sometimes it is.
But people seek you out because they think, well, she got through it. She knows how to do this. And you tell them what? I don't really know how to do it. I'm just putting one foot ahead of the next.
Pretty much, yeah. Yeah.
Is that the advice for somebody who faces something like this?
Everyone grieves in their own way, and everyone deals with their own situations, you know, as they do. I want people to feel hopeful that they can get through the tough things in their life, no matter what. I never compare my situation with someone else's. I just don't do that. I know that we all go through tough times in our lives, and I do believe that we all can get through it.
You've written the book, and it's Landon Napoleon who wrote it. He contacted me for input into the book as well because of the story we did. A really good guy who took great care with this. He did a nice job. It's a fascinating story, and it really, the section on the crash is relatively small. It's your life story.
Right.
And it's, I mean, you've lived it. It's been very, very interesting life. It hasn't always been perfect or pleasant, but you have somehow navigated it. We're going to take a break here on Newsmaker Sunday. Back with Karen Perry right after this. Final minutes with Karen Perry. As you know the story, if you were around in 2011 when she lost her 3 children, her estranged husband, 2 other men on a flight that crashed in the Superstitions on Thanksgiving Eve 2011. The book is out. People want you to talk. They want you to speak and tell your story. Was that an acquired taste to go out and speak before people and tell them your story and bare your soul? Each time it has to be exhausting. Like this has to be not easy.
Absolutely. It was not something I ever had envisioned myself doing. Before I had children, people would tell me, you need to write a book about some of my life.
Before all this?
Yeah. Yeah. And then after the children came along and this tragedy happened, it became very clear to me that it was a story that I thought would give people hope and inspiration.
You turned the wreckage of that plane into a sculpture, a piece of art. Tell me why you did it and what it means to you.
I did it because, you know, looking at the wreckage, it's such a hard thing to look at.
We looked at it together in the yard.
And we did. We looked at it. And it's hard to see an airplane like that and know that your family was part of that accident. And again, it was something that I thought we could turn, something that appeared very ugly into something beautiful and make it a piece of art. And that is underway, and it will reside at the Superstition Mountain Museum when it's completed.
It's great to see you again. We all love you here. You know that. This community loves you too. Great to see you, Karen. Karen Perry, my guest on Newsmaker Sunday. We'll see you next week.